Welcome. You're listening to the Malcontent News Russia-Ukraine War podcast, the show that cuts through the fog of war and updates you about the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Podcasts.
Hello, I'm Marina Yevshan, your host of the Russia-Ukraine War Report podcast, and today is August the 23rd, 2024. It has been 3,861 days since Russia started covert military operations in Crimea, 10 years and 184 days since the start of the Russia-Ukraine war, 2 years and 181 days since Russia expanded its war of aggression, and 18 days since Ukraine counter-invaded Russia. Today's podcast covers the events that happened on Thursday and Friday morning. You will find the Russia-Ukraine war map helpful to visualize the areas discussed. There is a link in the podcast description. There are some map updates today. The Russia-Ukraine War Report is compiled by our team from around the world. Today's report includes information from our direct contacts and journalists in Ukraine, the Russian Ministry of Defense, the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine morning reports, operational commands north, south and east of Ukraine, open source intelligence, our in-house team of analysts and geospatial experts, and pro-Ukrainian and pro-Russian mail bloggers and social media channels with a track record of trying to be accurate. We have one mission, the truth, because the truth matters. Here is my daily assessment. 1. We maintain that autocrat Vladimir Putin's order to recapture the Kursk region of Russia by October the 1st is unrealistic without redeploying additional assets from Ukraine. 2. The United States Department of State aligns with our earlier assessment that there is an extreme risk of Russian drone and missile attacks against civilians and civilian infrastructure between August the 23rd to the 25th due to the upcoming Ukrainian Independence Day on the August the 24th. 3. Russia will restart sustained attacks on Ukraine's energy infrastructure by October, continuing Russian crimes against humanity that started in October 2022, as outlined in 4 arrest warrants issued by the International Criminal Court. 4. The General Staff of the Armed Forces of Russia has decided to ignore Ukraine's Kursk offensive and commit all available combat power in the Donetsk, New York and Pokrovsk areas of operation. 5. Despite the new increase in operational tempo, we maintain Russia has no strategic reserve available to mount an effective defense of the Kursk region, continues to suffer unsustainable losses, and has committed almost all of its available conventional forces in Ukraine. 6. We assess the Kursk counter-invasion as strategically sound, despite Ukrainian forces lacking the resources to defend New York and Donetsk and the approaches to Pokrovsk and Selidove. 7. We maintain that Russia will achieve the operational goal of capturing New York and Donetsk in 2024, and we further assess that for Ukrainian forces, an extended battle in an urban environment is ill-advised. 8. The Russian economy is weaker than reported. 9. Persistent delays in the delivery of promised military hardware, munitions and funding continue to prevent the Ukrainian armed forces from reaching their full combat potential. 10. We maintain the world is caught in the mutually assured destruction instability paradox. 11. The policy of escalation management implemented by the NATO alliance and the United States, and to a small extent Germany, is a complete failure that has only encouraged further Russian aggression. 12. The attacks on Ukraine's energy infrastructure have incrementally increased the chance of an intentional nuclear accident at multiple nuclear power plants. On the 23rd of August, we celebrate the Day of the National Flag of Ukraine, the flag whose image is etched into souls of defenders of freedom and peace, the flag which makes Ukrainians cry tears of happiness and relief when escaping captivity and occupation, the flag which reminds of serene landscape of golden fields and blue skies. Let Ukrainian fields be golden and never again burn under enemy's fire. Let Ukrainian skies be clear and free, and let Ukrainian flag return to its all rightful places and fly proudly over our dear land. Now for the action report summary. Yesterday, Russia carried out 144 discrete assaults, and through August the 22nd, the 7-day moving average for daily attacks remained at 145. The VKS, that's the Russian Aerospace Forces, carried out 67 airstrikes, dropping 79 bombs on civilian and military targets in Ukraine. Russian ground forces conducted approximately 4,500 fire missions using tubed and barrel artillery. Over the last 24 hours, Russia launched 16 Shahed-136 one-way drones and 2 Iskander-M or North Korean-sourced KN-23 short-range ballistic missiles at Ukraine. 14 Shaheds were shot down and 2 more were disabled by electronic warfare. Missile debris landed in an open area of Cherkasy, causing damage to several nearby cars and retail shops. In the Kursk region, Ukraine controls 1,290 square kilometers and 94 hamlets, villages, settlements, and tactically significant areas, such as the Gazprom gas compressor and metering station at Sudzha. Another 299 square kilometers is in the gray zone, for a total area of 1,589 square kilometers. The Glushkovsky salient, where 2,500 to 3,000 Russian troops are isolated, is 564.5 square kilometers, unchanged from yesterday. Let's go into the details of what happened on the battlefield. This would be a good time to open up the war map on a second device and find the city of Sumy, that's in the northeastern part of Ukraine. There is a link to the map in the podcast description. Ready? Here we go. I start in the Glushkovsky area of operation, or AO, where Ukrainian advances south of Korenevo have started to push the grey area into the region. Russian troops broke operational security, or OPSEC, and provided a detailed battle damage assessment, also known as a BDA, of the same river bridge in Zvanya. In the video, they were able to drive across an area just wide enough for smaller vehicles, proving that the bridge is serviceable. Thanks to the OPSEC violation, we give that last section 5 days maximum. In Glushkovo, Ukrainian drones struck Russian military UAZ-452 loaves in the northeastern part of the settlement. Russian sources report that travel on the Glushkovo-Rylsk road is difficult due to the number of Ukrainian drones patrolling the ground line of communication, or GLOC, that's a supply line. The Ukrainian Air Force bombed Russian positions west of 2nd Muzhitsa. In southern Kulbaki, elements of the Russian 155th Naval Infantry Brigade were attacked by first-person view one-way drones. 800 meters away on the east bank of the Sinyak River, Ukrainian troops were attacked by Russian artillery. In the Korenevo AO, Ukrainian forces were visually confirmed in Krasnooktyabrsky, and we coded the village as under Ukrainian control. Fighting continued in the center of Komarovka and from the farm on the southern outskirts. Ukrainian forces were visually confirmed in the abandoned remains of the Soviet-era hamlet 10th Oktyabr. Fighting also continued in Korenevo, with Ukrainian forces trying to advance from the south on the railroad grid. Russian sources reported that the GLOC between Korenevo and Rylsk is saturated with Ukrainian drones, making continued support of the Russian garrison in Korenevo increasingly difficult. Armod released a video showing an attack helicopter firing rockets into Gavrilovka, suggesting Ukrainian forces were in the village. I say suggesting because it's unclear if the rocket attack hit anything. Russian sources also reported without evidence significant fighting was ongoing on the outskirts of Alexandrovka. Multiple Russian sources insisted that fighting continued in or on the edges of Lgovka, and then released videos showing the village is firmly under Ukrainian control. Everything is going to plan. In the Lgov operational direction, or OD, Armod reported fighting in the area of Skrylovka. southeast of Korenevo, and was 3151, operated by the Russian 810th Guards Naval Infantry Brigade, traveling on a dirt road toward Sheptuchovka, was ambushed by elements of the Ukrainian 82nd Air Assault Brigade. 4 Russian soldiers were killed and 2 were taken prisoner. Fighting continued in Malaya Loknya in the area of the former 11th Women's Prison, which we had previously identified as the regional men's prison. We maintain that elements of the 18th Guards Motor Rifle Brigade remain surrounded. Ukraine claimed that a drone-delivered IED struck the command post of the Chechen Akhmat in Большие Ugony, 20 kilometers from the closest fighting and 55 kilometers from the city of Kursk. We were able to geolocate the strike, but we cannot confirm if Chechen Akhmat or other Russian units used the building. In Sudzha, journalists with the United States newspaper Washington Post released a report filmed on August the 17th. After the Ukrainian occupation, some residents continued to shelter in the basement of a school and were receiving aid from Ukrainian forces. One woman in line for drinking water appealed to reporters for a green corridor to Russia to be opened, saying that the Ukrainians, quote, "are great, thank you, you're treating us very well. But you must understand, we want to return to our children, to go home," unquote. Kyiv has made numerous requests to Moscow to create a checkpoint where Russians under occupation can return to their country, with no response. When Ukrainian forces established control of the settlement, they found that Russian administrators had barricaded access to the city administration building and stopped keeping records on August the 3rd. They found evidence that some officials were planning for a siege before they evacuated. Here is my theater-wide update for the Kursk area. The Ukrainian Deputy Minister of Education and Science, Mikhailo Vinnytsky, said that Kyiv was prepared to provide education to school children in the occupied territories of the Kursk Oblast if it becomes necessary. Quote, "International humanitarian law prohibits the relocation of minors across borders during occupation or hostilities. We condemn our enemy for displacing children of Ukrainian citizens to the territory of the Russian Federation. We consider this a fundamental violation of human rights. Therefore, we are definitely not talking about any transfer of children from the Kursk Oblast to the territory of Ukraine." The advisor to the governor of the Kursk Oblast, Roman Alyokhin, advised residents in Rylsk to evacuate, adding that people shouldn't wait until the last minute. International Atomic Energy Agency Director General Rafael Grossi announced he plans to visit the Kursk nuclear power plant. Russia claimed, without evidence, that drone debris was found within 100 meters of the spent fuel nuclear storage facility at KNPP. Grossi called the, quote, "military activity in the vicinity of the plant a, quote, serious risk," and said the visit would provide the IAEA, quote, "with timely access to independently assess the situation." The Federal Security Service of Russia, FSB, has opened criminal investigations against British reporter Nick Patton-Walsh, Ukrainian correspondents Olesa Borovik and Diana Butsko, and Italian journalists Stefania Battistini and cameraman Simone Traini for illegally crossing the Russian-Ukrainian border in Sudzha. All entered Sudzha after Ukraine occupied the settlement to report on the situation. Moscow was so upset by the reports from a free press that they summoned the Italian ambassador seeking an explanation on why the journalists crossed the 1991 state border. The Russian opposition news agency Meduza reported that unnamed sources in the Kremlin had given 2 sets of instructions to Russian state media and propagandists on how to frame the Ukrainian occupation. On the one hand, coverage should minimize the situation and stress that a Russian victory will come shortly. However, the message should be tempered that there will be a new normal for parts of Russia that will be under long-term occupation.
You're listening to the Malcontent News Russia-Ukraine War podcast. Our team of journalists, researchers, and analysts is funded by readers, listeners, and viewers just like you. To support independent journalism, please consider becoming a patron. You can find us on patreon.com/malcontentnews.
Let's not forget about my home. Here is what happened in Ukraine, starting in the Kharkiv Oblast. In the Liptsi-Vovchansk AO, fighting continued in Vovchansk, where the Ukrainian Air Forces bombed the machine aggregate plant, which has remained in a technical encirclement for months. Russian troops have used drones to maintain supplies and occasionally slip through the no man's land between the factory and the apartment blocks to the north. The General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine hinted that a localized counteroffensive had started in the Globok area. Further south, in the Kupiansk AO, Russian forces carried out attacks north of Sinkivka and in the direction of Glushkivka. In the Luhansk Oblast, west of occupied Svatove, Russian attacks near Stelmachivka and Andriivka were repulsed. The Ukrainian 3rd Assault Brigade carried out a localized counteroffensive in the area of occupied Novovodyane and Karmazynivka, advancing up to 2,000 meters. Video of the counteroffensive showed the elite unit engaged in heavy fighting, often in close quarters. In addition to the restoration of lost defensive positions, the Ukrainian advance provided relief to the village of Makiivka. West of Crimea, Russian attacks in the direction of Makiivka, Novosadove and Torske were repulsed. Now, let's talk about the Donbas, where we start in the northeastern part of the Donetsk Oblast. Beginning in the Siversk AO, Russian troops increased their activity, carrying out assaults east and southeast of Bilogorivka, in Spirne, and southeast of Vyemka. In the Konstantinivka AO, Russian forces supported by the VKS continued their assaults on the western edges of the canal district of Chasiv Yar and the forested areas west of Ivanivska. There was no change in the situation. The situation in the Toretsk-New York AO remains critical. Fighting was concentrated in the northeastern part of Toretsk, where Russian troops advanced into the first streets of the settlement. Fighting also continued in Druzhba, Nelipivka, and the industrial district and the residential area in northeastern New York. In southwestern Donetsk Oblast, Russian forces made additional advances in the Pokrovsk AO. Russian attempts to advance in the direction of Vozdvizhenka, Zelenopole, and Mykolaiv were repulsed. Russian forces are being held back in Grodivka, where house-to-house fighting, supported by drones, artillery, and armor, was ongoing. Assaults in the direction of Marinivka were unsuccessful. Russian forces occupied the northern part of Ptyche, raising a flag over the first street of the settlement. In the Kurakhove AO, Russian forces continue to be stuck between Netailove and Karlivka and south of the Lozova River in northwestern Krasnogorivka. Ukrainian forces held their defensive positions on the eastern edge of Konstantinivka. At the time of recording, there were unconfirmed reports that Ukrainian forces had started a limited counteroffensive at Karlivka. Finally, in the Vuhledar AO, Russian forces launched attacks in the direction of Vuhledar and from occupied Volodymyrivka. We haven't talked about the Black Sea, occupied Crimea, Mykolaiv, and Odesa in a while. The Russian roll-on roll-off railroad car ferry Conroe Trader was hit by a domestically produced extended-range Neptune anti-ship cruise missile in Port Kavkaz in the Krasnodar Krai of Russia. The Conroe Trader was in port at the time of the strike and was loaded with 30 tanker cars full of fuel. The burning fuel spread to intact ones, which exploded, causing the ferry to sink. In occupied Crimea, residents rushed to buy petrol, with the I-95 already running out. Russian officials claimed that there is a 3 to 4 months supply of fuel, which is between 500% and 800% higher than estimates given in the spring. The ferry terminal at Port Kavkaz is closed indefinitely due to the damage and the need to remove the Conroe trader. This was the last operational ferry that could bring fuel to occupied Crimea. On July the 23rd, 2 Ro-Ro ferries were damaged by a Ukrainian missile attack, knocking both out of service. The only way left to transport fuel is on the Crimean bridge, which Russia has been trying to avoid. Ukraine has introduced new one-way drones that can reach the Kinburn Spit, a small part of the Mykolaiv Oblast that Russia still occupies. The drones have been striking Russian troops, equipment and ammunition depots for weeks, and Russian occupiers have started to complain online that it is becoming impossible to move due to the attacks. The most recent strike was on a warehouse of ammunition and fuel near occupied Pokrovska. We are going back to Russia to talk about areas outside of the Kursk Oblast. Satellite images and OPSEC-violating BDA pictures were publicly available just hours after Ukrainian drones struck the Marinovka military airfield in the Volgograd region. Russian propagandist fighter bomber claimed that all the aircraft at the base were scrambled before the attack due to the low speed of the drones. The claim was untrue. Pictures taken shortly after the attack showed several Russian fighter planes in damaged hangars. Ukraine used ball bearings to create fragmentation warheads to maximize damage. High-resolution satellite images from Airbus Defence and Space showed 4 hangars on the flight line were destroyed and 2 more with major damage. The ammunition depot was also destroyed, with scorching across the field. Additional hangars were severely damaged in other parts of the base. An analysis of the ground and satellite images determined that 2 Su-34s were destroyed, and a Su-24 and 2 more Su-34s were damaged. A 6th Su-24 that was destroyed was likely inoperative. 1 more aircraft was severely damaged, but it was impossible to determine if it was a Su-24 or Su-34. In the Rostov region, the strategic fuel storage facility in Proletarsk was attacked by Ukrainian drones for a second time and continued to burn out of control. Russian emergency services managers are concerned that tanks full of kerosene could ignite. Southwest of Rostov-on-Don, a naturally caused grass fire has burned out of control for days because of Russia's worker shortage and the amount of equipment at Proletarsk. Here is my Theaterwide update. Ukraine convinced Russian propagandist Two Majors to run a fundraiser for what the Mil bloggers believed was a Russian unit. After raising 1 million rubles, approximately $11,000, the money was transferred to a Ukrainian military unit. The main Defense Intelligence Directorate of Ukraine hacked Russian cable television networks, taking over the prime-time programming of Pervouralsk TV, Eurasia 360, Eurasia, and Channel 1. Several networks had to cut programming because they couldn't regain control of the broadcast, showing the realities of Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine. The Prime Minister of India, Narendra Modi, arrived in Kyiv for his first state visit to Ukraine. Modi is reportedly carrying a message from autocrat Vladimir Putin and will engage in bilateral trade negotiations. The Verkhovna Rada ratified the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court and will recognize future ICC arrest warrants. The bill also recognized Article 124 of the Rome Statute, which creates a 7-year transitional period where the jurisdiction of the court is not recognized with respect to war crimes allegedly committed. United States provided 155mm artillery shells equipped with M70 anti-tank mines have performed poorly, likely due to the age of the munitions and the complexity of the fuses. Ukraine is disassembling the shells, refurbishing the mines, replacing the fuses, and then using them as drone-dropped munitions. President of Ukraine Volodymyr Zelensky expressed frustration about the continued delays in receiving the promised $50 billion in frozen Russian assets to fund Ukraine's defense. Quote, "We need the proceeds of the aggressor's assets to work for real defense assistance against the aggressor. The relevant discussions have been ongoing for too long, and we finally need decisions." The Netherlands announced it would transfer 51 Robin radar systems mobile radars by the end of the year. The radars are designed to detect mini-drones and can operate even while the support vehicle is moving up to 100 km per hour. And that's what we know. Join me again on Tuesday as I take the day off on Monday in honor of Ukrainian Independence Day, which is on the 24th of August. If there are major events, you can follow our Patreon for flash reports and our social media channels. Your support of my home, Ukraine, helps us make history and protect the future for all.
You've been listening to the Malcontent News Russia-Ukraine War podcast. To help keep us independent, please consider providing financial support by becoming a patron. Want on-demand news in your hand? Download the Google News app and make Malcontent News one of your favorites to receive breaking news updates. Thank you for listening.